were studying for your doctorate in the 70s, right? I think your CV said you got your doctorate in 76.
Correct.
And you have alluded earlier in the interview to the fact that there was a lot of political turmoil going on from the late 60s into the 70s, certainly Vietnam, gay rights, women's liberation was kind of part of that whole political, cultural backdrop. What was your connection with any of that?
I was so much less political then than I am now, and I'm not quite sure why. I think, and it's funny, I think in my college years and my graduate school years were the periods, and maybe this is appropriate, of sort of the greatest doubt about myself and also about whether I have got the correct understanding of issues. I remember in college there was some event that I was invited to as a student, not quite a student leader, but a student that they invited. And it was being picketed because the person was associated with the Johnson administration, and I really didn't know which way to go. I felt tormented. And I did go on some anti-war marches, but I was not a leader. Didn't go to meetings and figure out what to do next. I was upset about it, but not involved with it. And I was not involved with the women's movement on a national political level. I think I was much more concerned about career opportunities for women in graduate school, and were we being treated seriously by the faculty. I know another faculty member whom I adored and who was just a wonderful, wonderful man who died recently, Sheldon White.
Yes.
And I remember a conversation with him, and he was spectacular in every way. But I remember a conversation that stuck out to me at the time, in which we must have been talking about this issue about women going on or women in graduate school, and he said, well, the last student that I worked with and trained dropped out she's not going on, and I have to wonder to what extent women are going to take advantage of this education, and can you invest in them as much as you can in male students? And that was a good conversation.
Yeah.
So I was interested in issues like that. I think that I think gay rights I would have been sympathetic, I'm sure, but I think they were sort of off my radar. I don't remember an engagement with that issue. Certainly there was no formal engagement with that issue. And then I think that this study of poor women was my thing.
Yeah.
And so when people criticize the women's movement as it being a white middle class movement, it's so contrary to my own experience, where my first deep involvement, beginning in 1976, was with a multiracial movement about poor women. And it seemed to me that feminists at NIMH and elsewhere were very sympathetic and very concerned with poor women and with women of color. So I can appreciate the criticism, and I'm aware that I'm not tuned into all of the strands, and I've read some of the history, but my own involvement began with a focus on race and a focus on class and economic opportunity, and that to me is part and parcel. I don't think it makes the slightest sense to be a feminist who's, and I would say that there are strands of feminism that I find myself uninterested in, because they don't pay sufficient attention to these issues.
Right.
And I made the decision early on that my passion was then and was going to continue to be poor women, and there were exciting things going on at the time about professional women and career opportunities, and I think that's a very important issue, and ironically that is the issue I'm now working on, women in the sciences and engineering. But at the time it felt to me that the greater urgency, or my greater interest, was around the issue of poor women.
Okay. Well, tell me your views on how that has actually played out, that kind of the issue of how psychologists have dealt with issues like class, for example. You come from a background where it was deeply central to what you did as a psychologist from early on. But there have been, in fact, some criticisms, I think, also from people outside psychology, so people in the broader women's studies field, who don't see psychologists as having engaged, perhaps, with those kinds of issues adequately, or haven't theorized them maybe in the same way that people outside psychology have. What is your perspective on that?
I agree with the critique. I don't understand why there has been so little attention, and I have a sort of a career niche in being one of the few psychologists who attend to these issues, which is why I get invited when people want to talk about social class. It should be pervasive concern.
Yeah.
It should be. I don't. Just as a great revelation is that you cannot simply take theories that you've developed about men and apply them to women, or treatment forms that you've developed, or and that in fact that if you study women, you'll probably learn some things that are very interesting and useful when you go back to thinking about men again, and that there is this useful, and so that seems to me such an obvious piece of knowledge we have gained, but we seem to forget that frequently. Then if you have that piece of knowledge and understanding, how can you not extend this to, and I think maybe there's been a better job done on race and ethnicity and immigration status, although I think these are still tangential, peripheral to psychology. We happen to live in a nation which is unique and fascinating for the bizarre extremity of our class divides, and this should be central. This should be, I think, just as we discover that being white is not nothing, being white is highly significant, being male is very significant, being female, being of upper middle class, or living in historical era of rapidly widening gaps between the rich and the middle class, poor. I think these things are central to psychology, and there are little bits of, I think, exciting work that's being done where people study how if you just bring money into the conversation, now people become more self-interested in later game playing. But I think there's a whole world here of work to be done, and it seems to me surprising that it has been kept so peripheral.
Yeah.
So I'm involved also. There is an APA group, or a group of psychologists at any rate, that the social network, the social class network, or SES network, or something like this.
Okay.
And the two events that I am involved in at APA this year are about are ones that they have highlighted.
Right.
And one of them is a panel about how can we enrich psychology by attending to socioeconomic class issues.
Right.
So I think by all means this is needed in the field, both for adequate theory, for adequate treatment. I reviewed a study which I don't think has been published yet, suggesting that clinicians who attend to these issues do much better, and not just for poor people. I think so much of human psychology has to do with how we rank ourselves, how we see ourselves in relation to our peers, anxieties we have about status and money. So, there should be so much more of it.
Yeah. Well, I know